Thank you for joining us. The main topic of this conference is terrorism. And with Iraq and Syria seeing really the demise of the Islamic State, but the foreign fighters really returning to Europe and other countries around the world, what is the UN doing to really stop that, to maybe prevent further radicalization or de-radicalization of Europeans who went to fight with the Islamic State?
Well, first of all, we do all hope that this is the end of the Islamic State, and mostly in Iraq, and hopefully that'll happen soon in Syria. The problem of foreign fighters remains one of perhaps the key challenges that needs to be addressed today, along with the financing of terrorism and as well as the background of incitement and radical talk that we are still hearing. What on the UN side we're focusing on right now is the Secretary General has appointed a new Under Secretary General to focus on counterterrorism activities. He's bringing together next year, early next year, the first global summit of national anti-terrorism forces from all countries, and in strengthening the work that we do with the European countries in particular on de-radicalization and on fighting the challenge of returning foreign fighters. But there is one other challenge which is very substantial, and that is what we have to do to prevent those areas that have been liberated from Daesh to be taken over back by other terrorist groups. And this is where the main focus right now of UN operations in Iraq, for example, is rebuilding these areas, providing services to people, allowing people to go back, to return to schools, seeing security delivered by the national governments, but also seeing development, health, education, and other opportunities. And this is a critical element, because if we allow the areas that have been liberated from Daesh to fall back in chaos and disorder, we haven't done much except replace one source of radicalism with another.
And to bring it more local back to Israel, we're expecting an announcement from U.S. President Donald Trump today on the issue of Jerusalem. What does the UN think about that? And do you think that it might have actually an effect on the reconciliation talks between Hamas and Fatah?
Well, let's see what the president announces later today. But in any case, Jerusalem is being connected and will always be connected to the Jewish people for thousands of years. It is also the center of life for Palestinians. It hosts the holy sites of three religions. So what the Secretary General has always warned is for any action that be taken in this conflict, in this context, to be very careful because of the implications. What we want to see is that all the final status issues that are the basis of an Israeli-Palestinian agreement be addressed through negotiations. Jerusalem is one of those issues. That we see, first of all, a return to negotiations, and secondly, that actions that are unilateral by all sides that may undermine the prospects of negotiations or undermine the prospects of a two-state solution, that those actions be, that people refrain from those actions. But let's see again what the announcement of the Americans today will be. It will certainly have an effect on different aspects of the peace process. I'm sure also on the internal process that is between Fatah and Hamas related to Gaza. But again, it happens later today, so let's see.
It's quite a common view in Israel to see the UN as anti-Israel, and critics say that many resolutions are passed against Israel, whereas other countries, totalitarian countries, enjoy relative diplomatic quiet. What's your response to this?
Well, you have to take your question to your foreign ministry. They represent Israel in the United Nations. They represent Israel in the votes. What I would say is that you need to focus much more on building the coalitions and the alliances that Israel needs to present itself before the world. Obviously, part of that effort will be for people to see Israel for what it is. It is a dynamic, democratic country with a growing economy that can offer a lot to the world. But it also needs to understand that without progress and without focusing on the Palestinian issue and resolving the Palestinian issue and opening towards the Arab countries will be very difficult, if not impossible. And I hope that this realization, which is, I think, growing over the last few years here in Israel and in the region, will be part of the efforts of all actors that will ultimately bring the Israeli leadership, the Palestinian leadership, and the international negotiations, the Americans, the Russians, the European Union, the UN, back together on the table, supporting a peaceful resolution of the conflict. I think these are sort of the very broad parameters. I know there's been a lot of criticism of various resolutions that have been voted in the General Assembly and the Security Council as well in the UN, but these are resolutions that are voted by member states. And member states obviously have their political priorities, they have their political views that design, if you wish, their behavior. For us in the Secretariat, for the Secretary General, the goal has always been to be even-handed, to treat all member states equally, and to speak out when we see things going wrong, to speak out, and when we see things going right, to commend them.
So do you agree or disagree that the focus on Israel is disproportionate?
I think that's, I've heard that criticism in different countries from different governments. I've heard it in Iraq, where people sometimes feel the same way for different reasons. I hear it here. I've heard it in the Balkans in the past. So I think that type of an analysis is always very much local and very much connected to domestic politics. My goal is not to be part of domestic politics. My goal is to make sure that the Secretary General, when he deals with countries, including Israel, and when he deals with conflicts and problems, does it in an even-handed manner.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.